Samuel Leeds runs one of the biggest property training companies in the UK. He boasts a large social media following with 171,000 followers on Instagram, and recently he went viral after filming himself chainsawing a front door on one of his properties. Joining me now is the man himself to debate his video and landlordism in general. Samuel, thank you for appearing on Turn Left.
It's great to be here. I think debate is healthy, and hopefully we'll have a fun discussion.
Yeah, we'll see. But let's get into it. So a couple of days ago, you went a bit viral because you filmed yourself chainsawing a front door because, and to quote you, a guest hadn't paid.
Yeah.
But your lawyers advised you not to do it, but you said it was fun and you did it anyway. So why did you do it?
Well, it's interesting because, when I say my lawyers advised me not to do it, I guess there's two things going on. Firstly, there's the PR stunt side of it, which my lawyers advised me not to do. And then there's the actual evicting a guest in that way. So just for the record, it was, and I have been out on national TV, it was a stunt. I wasn't actually evicting a tenant or a guest. However, I did it for a few reasons. The first reason I did it was to show the fact that the media will just jump on stuff regardless of trying to actually get the facts. So I just said, oh, there's a guest that hasn't paid. There's a big difference between a guest and a tenant legally. And all the headlines were, landlord evicts tenant. Didn't ask me any questions. Didn't find out, well, hang on, maybe there's a brothel going on.
Yeah,
maybe
I suppose that the implication is quite strong there. I mean, you are a famous landlord and you're tearing down a door and saying someone's not paying. So, I mean, I agree that the media is quite toxic sometimes. But I don't think it was unreasonable to think that. I mean, we were all thinking it, and I'm pretty sure that when you made that video, you knew that was the implication. So I don't know if you should get really annoyed if people come to that conclusion, because it was implied, right?
But that's the point. Yeah. I wouldn't be annoyed if people came to the conclusion, no. But the media and reporting it and saying this happened without having the facts, it shows what the media are like. It shows that they'll just run with stories, sensational headlines.
So what do you think particular was wrong with the reporting?
Well, for a start, it wasn't. I never said that there was a tenant in the property. And in my post, I made it very clear that it was a property used for guests. It was actually a hotel, C1 class. So the fact that they said tenant was not true. Had not come from me. And also just the fact that they made me out to be the bad guy. Demonized me to be a terrible landlord, when actually, without knowing the facts, I mean, as I said, it could have been that it was being used for a brothel. It could have been used for illegal storage. Who knows what the facts were? And they didn't care or ask. They just thought, oh, this will be a sexy headline, So that was, and I think there's a lot of landlord bashing that goes on. I know we're going to get on to talk about this, but like landlords are greedy, horrible, and I don't think that's the case. I think that a lot of landlords are struggling themselves financially. A lot of landlords are good, compassionate people, but there's a lot of people that think just because you own a property and you're a landlord, you're a bad person. And I don't think that's true at all.
Okay, well, I mean, we are going to come on to that, but to go back a second, I think again, like the implication here is that it was a publicity stunt. I mean, look, you said it on GB News that it was kind of fake. I kind of guessed that, but then that leads me to think, well, what was the point? Because you've cost yourself your own money by chainsawing your door down to make a point, and this is at the time when we have a housing crisis, we have a cost of living crisis, people are struggling to pay rent, and you've just added more anxiety to, and you think that landlords are persecuted. That is one of the most delusional things I've ever heard in my life. It's really unhinged, but again, we'll get onto that. But tenants are facing a tough time, and you're just adding anxiety to that. You're adding fuel to the fire. So I ask, what was the real broader point here? Apart from just, the media side, the media's bad, great, we kind of agree on that. But what was the broader point?
Well, for a start, it's got us talking, hasn't it?
Yeah.
It's getting people thinking and talking about these issues, which I think is a good thing. So, what the intention behind it, I think, is it's exposed the media that they just jump to sensationalized stories and print without actually fact checking, and it's got people talking about these important issues.
But I'm assuming, obviously, you're coming at it from the angle on the pro landlord side, obviously, and that'll be ridiculous to claim otherwise. You are a landlord.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm. Of course, I'm a landlord, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be completely biased and I'm going to be fighting for landlords and at the expense of tenants. Not at all. I'm a landlord and I have a lot of properties, but I also am grappling with things, as everybody is, on a day by day, about the best way to be, the best way to behave, the best way to act. Yeah, I mean, I'm pro landlord, but I'm also pro human.
Okay. Again, I've obviously done a bit of research on you, and I've seen a couple of things you've done before. When you say stuff like that, and then you tweet stuff saying poor people are poor because they're lazy, and you can see if they're poor within 5 minutes, can you see why people might have a picture of you? Or there's videos you go. That's actually
not what I said. That's actually not what I said. What? Slightly misquoted.
Okay. I mean, I have the tweet, but what did you mean by that? Now, I'll give you a chance to clarify.
What I actually said, you were almost word for word. You just missed it. I think from my memory, you missed out the word most. Most poor people.
That is still pretty antagonistic, though, if you say most poor people. I mean, do you believe that? Do you think that most, okay, not all, but most poor people are lazy?
I think most people are lazy.
Right. So are you lazy?
I'm a lazy. I can be lazy.
Right,
I've been lazy when I've done jobs that I don't particularly enjoy.
Sure.
I've been very lazy about the job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and so I can tell whether somebody's wealthy or poor within 5 minutes of meeting them.
How do you know what's the identifier to know that they're rich or poor or whatever?
It's a great question. You can tell by the way that they think and act around money. So if somebody hates rich people and thinks that if you make a lot of money, it's unethical, it's bad, then the chances are they're probably not going to be rich themselves, because if they were, they'd be, you know, if they had come across a business opportunity, they're not going to take up on it and become rich, because they don't believe that rich people are good people, and everybody wants to be a good person. So most people that believe that rich people are greedy, rich people are jerks, if they speak badly on rich people, they're probably...
Yeah, but I mean, sure, but that is slightly different to saying that they're lazy, because there are millions of people who work incredibly hard, just like an NHS doctors, for example, and they're poor, and they're struggling, and that is because, I mean, I would argue as a socialist, it's down to the economic system we're in, to say that most people... To try and quote you properly, most people are lazy, or sorry, most people are poor because they're lazy. That's just factually incorrect. And I think, again, if you are trying to say to the media that landlords have a bad rap, and then you're someone who's, you know, you're doing very well for yourself, you've got hundreds of properties in your portfolio, you're a multi-millionaire, to then say things like that, it seems like you're not helping yourself, right?
Yeah, I think you've got a good point in terms of definitely not all poor. I mean, I've been to some of the poorest parts of the world, and I also believe that some of the poorest people are the hardest workers.
Sure,
you know, I've met people that are extremely hardworking and they've not got anything. So yeah, I agree with you. It definitely isn't the case for all people, and that's why I said most. And we can debate whether even that's correct. It might not be most. I definitely think, and my audience that I'm speaking to, you know, people that are trying to be successful in this country. The opportunities that we've got to create wealth and to become successful are huge. And for people, my audience, and for people that are wanting to be successful and wanting to start businesses, but they don't, and then they complain about it, I think that generally the majority of the case is that it's because they're lazy.
So you don't think there's any economic barriers to it? You don't think that the economic system is rigged against them? Because this is the thing, like, look, no one says, and I would say the majority of people in this country don't hate rich people. In fact, I think we have a bit of an obsession with rich people, that we seem to think that they're geniuses and there's something special about them. Like, you're a billionaire because you work really hard, but you're ignoring all of the other faculties within the economy that can stop people from being successful. And one of them, obviously, I think I've kind of got you to agree that, look, hard work doesn't just come...
I agree with that.
Right, exactly. You could be a hard worker and not get somewhere, and then it kind of pivots to, well, it's about being smarter. Most people don't think that people are successful or bad people or anything like that, but if you're from a poor background, statistically, you're more likely to end up being poor. And if you're someone who's gone through social mobility, has grown up from zero to nothing, I've seen your front pages, or not front pages, but I've seen your stories that you said you've gone from rags to riches. That can happen. But it's the exception, not the rule. So it doesn't mean that you didn't work hard or other people didn't work hard to get to where they were. But majority of times, that's not what happens. And I guess, again, seeing this sort of rhetoric angers a lot of people. So you might be thinking that, people are well, yeah, sure. But I think you might be thinking people are just jealous and that's why they're angry. But actually, they recognise there's a broken economic system at play here.
Yeah, but if it pisses people off and they're annoyed, then that's good, because then it might make people work harder or take personal responsibility. And there definitely is an economic. Of course, if you're born into a rich family, it's going to be way easier for you to be successful and to be than if you're born into poverty or born into nothing. Absolutely, but I think that personal responsibility is a good thing, and if you take responsibility and say, regardless of my background, regardless of my finances of my parents and everything like that, I believe that I can be successful, and I'm going to take personal responsibility. I think that's a good thing.
Well, I would say that most people do take personal responsibility, and I think you said that there's a bit of a persecution from landlords in the media. I would say the opposite is true. There's so much propaganda against people who are in low-paid work, or those on universal credit, or they're just lazy, they're just stealing off the state, when you got actually most people on universal credit are in work, for example. So I think you might say, sure, that's a factor, but I would say that is like 99% of it. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard. That doesn't mean you shouldn't take personal responsibility. But I think when people see someone who's very successful, especially through landlordism, we're going to get into the meat of this in a second, you get onto that, and then you're struggling, and then you got Samuel Leeds, the big influencer, making publicity stunts. I get why they're angry, but
it's not a bad thing, though. It's not a bad thing, because a lot I can name hundreds of people that have come from nothing, come from a poor background, that have seen my posts like that, and it's made them think, damn, maybe he's right. Maybe I can make something of my life. Maybe I can be successful, and it's pushed people and a positive effect. I mean, I remember when my doctor, about a year ago, I was in Uganda, and I was 5 stone heavier than I am now, so I wasn't taking responsibility of my health. And I met a doctor in Uganda, and he ripped me for being fat, and he was really hard on me, and it actually had a positive effect on me. Now, for some people, that would be.
I was going to say, really, not everybody responds the same, right, do they? So.
Exactly, and some people will respond to my tweets and be angry, and it might not be helpful, and then some people might be inspired, and everybody, but my intention is definitely to see people win and to help people. It's not to try and taunt people. Even though it might look like that. I feel
it's a bold claim, the landlord that is a philanthropist. He's actually just trying to egg people on. But look, let's get onto the meat of landlordism, right? Because when you went on GB News, I mean, look, I think GB News is a right-wing media channel. The presenter, he barely pushed back on anything you said, but he did talk about the fact that, look, there are people in a far desperate situation than you are. And he said to you that, can't you just let them off a rent? And I've got my personal opinion on this as well, but I want to ask you about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, every situation is different. And, if you've got a tenant not paying rent, of course, you're going to have to make a call and decide what everyone's going to have to make a call and decide what the right thing to do is. But my point is that you can't go into Sainsbury's and take food and just say, look, it's a commodity, it's a human right, let me have it for free. They wouldn't allow that.
Sorry, I'm just cutting in, but that analogy doesn't work, because let's take your example, going to Sainsbury's, and you said it's a commodity. That's a commodity Sainsbury's is producing for you, and you're taking it away. So Sainsbury's are at a loss, but you still got the deed on the property. The property's still yours. If someone's not paying rent, it's just factually incorrect. It's annoying, but it's factually incorrect to say it's stealing from you, because the property, the quantity is still yours.
All right. If you try and borrow, if you take a car from a garage, say it's a necessity, I need to get to work, I'll borrow it for free, you wouldn't be allowed. You'd be a criminal.
Yeah, but again, that's still taking the commodity away from someone.
So
what I mean by this is landlords, and I'm going to do this more broadly, landlords have power over the tenant, right? You have control of the property. And as you just said, if tenants don't pay, you have the state that backs you. The state backs you to kick these people out. So there is no situation where a landlord is really at risk, is there? But at the same time, tenants are in a far more precarious situation.
I disagree. I think that, for a start, if you've got a property, most landlords have got mortgage payments and stuff. So if you might be paying £500 a month on the mortgage, then you've got your insurance and all your running costs.
Sure, but I could say, so what? So what's that? Because at the end of the day, if you're a landlord, you've got the tenant, they're paying for your mortgage, right? You're taking money and profit off of the back of someone else who's actually going to work. So if you've got a mortgage to pay, then you just got to join the world. You could join the rest of us and go and get a job and make an income to pay for that mortgage. The point is that if a tenant doesn't pay their rent, what happens to them is they're most likely going to be evicted. They're going to be potentially homeless or in a far more precarious situation. If you're a landlord and a tenant doesn't pay rent, you're not in that same situation. Either you're in your situation who does very well for himself, probably wouldn't even notice, or another landlord who's got one little property, doesn't make much profit. But it just means he has to do what the rest of us do and just get a job and pay for a mortgage. The point is, why are landlords entitled to someone else's income when really in society being a landlord doesn't add any social utility? It doesn't provide to society. And my argument is that not in a personal attack, but landlords are a leech on society. Again, this is not a personal attack. This is just a descriptor of the economic situation. So I think
to me, it's, sorry, go on.
No, go on. No, go on.
No, I was just going to say, it just shocks me because you seem like a very intelligent, articulate person, very, articulate. But what you're saying doesn't make any sense. I'm
happy to explain it again.
Yeah, no, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense at all. And I'm not coming on here trying to be a big I am and try and shoot somebody down or prove you wrong. I'm not here to do that. I'm here because there's a lot of people that think like you.
Yeah.
And I don't get it. I mean, how is it any different from any business? If you're selling anything or offering something, whether that's for rent, if you have two bicycles and you ride one and you rent the other, how is that different from having two properties and you live in one and you rent the other?
I mean, I'm happy to explain the difference. So, okay, I'll give you an example. I don't know if you follow American politics that much, but recently there was a writers' strike of the WGA, Writers Guild of America, and basically they were striking, one, for increase in pay, but two, for residual pay. And if you don't know what that means, that essentially is actors or creative workers who've worked on a project, on a movie, get paid their wage, but you then got streaming services who will continue to stream, continue to make profit, yet these people who actually put their labour in, put their creative skills to work, doesn't get paid for it. So you've got a streaming platform that doesn't really add much social utility, much value, yet they get to have the increased profits or the future profits where the labourers don't. And this is the sort of where I see landlordism at, is that I think, and most people in society think, that you should work and you should bring social utility to society. We don't like freeloaders. We don't like people sitting on their ass and do nothing. I'm a lefty, so I'm a big supporter of the welfare state, for example, because I think we need a social safety net. But there are people who don't think that. Yeah, we don't apply to the same to landlords, because you got to think, what is the social utility landlords are actually bringing? Now, if you're paying a mortgage, we would agree that's probably the value of the house. Okay, the mortgage is the repayment back to the lender. Landlords come in, will pick up the mortgage bill or buy it outright, then add a profit onto the rent to the tenant, and then the tenant doesn't even own it. So they're in a far worse position. They're paying more for less, and that doesn't seem to make any sense whatsoever. So that's where I say that there's no social utility from landlords or landlordism, because they're not actually they're not doing any laborious work or actually producing a product for society. Now, you brought up businesses. Again, I would disagree the analogy here, because a business, whether it's a product or something, they are producing that product. Someone is purchasing that product and then they're keeping it. They now own it. But when it comes to housing, especially renting, people are paying more than the market rate for the mortgage, yet they're not owning anything and they still don't have full control, and the landlord can still kick them out. That doesn't seem very fair.
It seems totally fair. I mean, I've been a tenant, and I've also had properties and had tenants. I've been on both ends of the spectrum. And when you're a landlord, your product is your property. That's your product. That's your service. And your tenant is your customer. It's just a business. If you've got something that people want, and then you're charging the going rate for them to have it. I mean,
I wouldn't say it's what they want, though. It's what they need. And this is the problem. The biggest fuck up of human society, I think, is the commodification of housing. We don't do this for anything else, and actually even food, we don't do it for food, because once again, as the analogy we brought up earlier, purchasing food, that is still something that I now own when I bought it. we stopped it with healthcare, right? In the US, you got to get health insurance, and I particularly think it's absolutely screwed up that you can get corporations profiting off people's illness. Now, thankfully, in this country, we built the NHS because we realised we need to decommodify healthcare. People need it; it's not a choice, and that's the same with housing. Fair enough, if you're going to a restaurant and you're getting a service, you're going on Netflix and purchasing a service, or you're buying something. These aren't human rights, but people need to rent, and when you realise that majority of we have
that in the UK. We have council houses and we have benefits. You know, if someone's struggling, they've not got a job seekers allowance. If you need to live somewhere and you haven't got the money, the council will pay. Obviously, it's not going to be incredible, beautiful, big, fancy house, but we do have that in the UK.
I mean, I would say we used to have it with council. I'm glad you brought up council housing, actually, because we used to believe that social housing was a good thing, and then Margaret Thatcher came along, brought in the neoliberal reforms, and essentially created a world of landlords. And now we've sold off a lot of our council houses. And as I brought before, we have a housing crisis. There is actually a shortage of housing, and then we have some landlords that are buying up the stock, inflating the prices, and then many people who don't want to rent are forced into it because they can't afford a house, they can't afford a deposit, and they're stuck in this cycle of renting because and I was doing research on this, the average rent cost in the UK is more than a mortgage. So how would it be for a first-time buyer who's working minimum wage or whatever, and they're working really hard and half their income goes to rent, and they're actually paying more than they would be for a mortgage? So it's a kind of a catch-22. And then we have people who are exploiting that situation just for profit. It seems incredibly doesn't seem very sustainable.
I think that you say exploiting the situation for profit, and I get that it's tough. I mean, the average salary, and then you look at the average rent. It's not easy to just live, just live a comfortable life. It's not. It's tough, and I get that fully. But I don't see really how what I'm doing, buying properties, renting them out, is exploiting the situation. I mean, for a start, nearly all of the properties that I buy, they're rundown houses. So if you're buying a rundown house, that's a property it can't be bought by a first-time buyer. It's not going to be bought by even a buy-to-let landlord. So I'm buying houses, doing them up, and then renting them out. Now, what I'm actually doing by doing that is I'm bringing more houses into the country. So it's helping the housing crisis. I've just built. We bought a factory where we've got planning permission. I'm in the process of building 48 new houses at the moment. I mean, that's huge.
Okay, so I kind of disagree with that because I don't think landlords provide housing, and I think that the idea that housing exists because of landlords, I think, is a fallacy. What you're doing in that situation is you're providing capital, right? But it's the workers, it's the labourers who are building that house. They're the ones that's producing value for society. Now, why aren't the builders of the house, why aren't they taking 99% of the profit? Why are you going to take 99% of the profit? Because why wouldn't you? I mean, that's your position. I understand what you're trying to do, and this is the point where I'm saying, I'm not saying that all landlords are bastards. That's far from it. There are people who probably think that, but that's not my analysis of the situation. I'm not making a moral argument here. I'm making a systemic argument. So the labourers, those that build the house, they're the ones creating value for society, and you're taking the value away from it by pocketing the cash. So I would dispute that you're really building houses. Plus, there's multiple ways how you can bring houses into society. We touched on council housing, and there are things such as what we should be doing is renting from the state. I think that's a great idea because what you have essentially is one way you could do it is you rent out at cost price. So the person who wants to be a tenant doesn't have to pay extortionate pricing. Another way is mutual housing or cooperative housing. We used to have them actually, building societies. Nationwide used to be one of them, Northern Rock, before they were bought off by private banks. And you had communities that come together and pull the resources together to build a lot of housing, and people got the worth of the investment. They weren't ripped off or anything. So I dispute that landlords are bringing housing. Now, I will slightly agree that under this current system, you can't just ban landlords overnight. There is a transitional period here, obviously. But the fundamentals is, I disagree that landlords are providing service or anything of social value, of social utility. Now, a lot of landlords only have one house, don't make much of a profit. And this is why I do want to pivot back to you, because your company, is it Samuel Leeds Properties? Is that what you're called?
I've got quite a few. Yeah, Samuel
Quite a
Leeds
few.
Limited. I've got Samuel Leeds Holdings, which
Right.
is the company above all the companies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then your old company used to be buy low, rent high. And this is the thing where I
Yeah.
kind of talk about exploitation. Again, when I say exploitation, it's not trying to make a necessarily moral argument. It's just a systemic argument.
Yeah.
There was a video of you that went, again, quite viral. I mean, you're pretty good at social media. I'll give you that. And you were talking about, well, you need to buy low and rent high. The problem with that is that I would say that's definitely exploitation, because would you not agree that's inflating house pricing? Would you not agree that's inflating rent? And plus, that's also a form of gentrification, because if you go into an area which has got low cost housing, those in that area might not be able to afford those rents because you've now just hiked up the price. I would say things like that is exploitative. So I would say that landlords existing in itself is exploitative, whether you're a good or bad person. And then obviously, yeah, I am pivoting to you specifically. I feel like these things are kind of exploitative as well.
I mean, buy low, rent high. What that is it's when you buy a house and you buy it as cheap as you can, negotiate well, and then you rent it out, split it up, rent it out room by room, which again, ironically, is actually making more affordable. I mean, the reason that rents are so high is because there's a shortage of rental properties. That's why they're high. So when I buy a property and turn it into a HMO and turn one property into 4 or 5 units, then I'm actually bringing down the cost of rent because I'm bringing more supply into the marketplace.
But then aren't you also shrinking the size of the house? So yeah, but again, that seems like you're just admitting that's been a bit exploitative, right? I mean, I don't know if you've seen this. There was this amazing picture on the internet. It was really good of somebody purchased a house or they're renting, and in the room it was half a window. I don't know if you've seen it. It was quite a famous picture, and there was a wall built inside it. Now this room used to be quite big, and it was clearly a landlord came in, turned this room into one room which is barely functional as a room, and then said, "Oh, it's got more bedrooms, therefore it's higher in value." Things like that, I don't see that adds value. That actually, I would say, even decreases value.
Well, it's inhumane. That's the problem. It's inhumane. You're renting a property out. When I'm renting out properties room by room, firstly, I'm abiding by the law, and there is laws and regulations to govern how big the room could be. It has to be at least 70 square feet. It needs to have natural daylight, and. So, if you break the rules and you're unethical and you rent out little rabbit run rooms, then you're probably going to end up with all kinds of problems and legal problems as well. But I think providing accommodation for people where they've got a nice little room, an ensuite, bills are included, £500 a month, it's really helpful to people, because at the minute, what people are going to do, rent, and if you live in the middle of England in Birmingham, which is where I'm from, you can rent an apartment for say £700 a month. Then you've got all your bills. Then you furnish the property. You're talking £1,000 a month just to have a roof over your head. Well, your salary is only £2,000, so you're screwed. Whereas if I come along and go, actually, buy low, rent high. I bought a cheap house here and I'm renting it out room by room. You can rent a room off of me for £500. It's a nice room. It's fully furnished. There's super fast Wi-Fi. You've got an ensuite. £500 a month, bills included. That's offering a service. The fact that I'm profiting from that.
Well, first of all, they're paying for the service, right? Because and this is an unfortunate thing. I don't know about you, but there are some landlords who obviously charge they're paying for your mortgage, and then you're adding the markup to it, and then they don't even fulfill the services, right? That's one issue.
That's not good.
And you might, that's the thing. You might say that's not good, but that's the system that allows it to be. Because I want to touch on what you said before. You said, well, I'm following all the rules, all the legislation. I'm staying within the confines of the legal system. That to me isn't necessarily a case to say, well, I'm doing fine now, because I think the legal system that supports tenants is weak. We struggled to get, our MPs struggled to pass through legislation to make sure that homes were fit for human habitation. And it just so happens that 90 MPs are landlords. You recently actually posted yourself quite a while ago that the government has now made it easier for you to turn a house into small different flats, as we just discussed, and you're making more of a profit of it. That doesn't seem like, it's technically legal, but it doesn't seem like it's right. But again,
you should be rejoicing that new law that's coming in, permitted development.
But then why would I rejoice though that when someone comes in, looks at the value of a house and says, right, I'm now going to charge double or triple, at the same time when you agree that people are struggling to find places to rent, when we have a situation where people are bidding on renting, people paying all up front. It doesn't seem very fair. Why
Well,
is the growth of landlords? The growth of landlords has also meant that housing has become more precarious, because your logic would mean that the growth of landlords mean it'll be even better, but the housing crisis has only got worse. And yes, it's down to building, but it's down to a multitude of things by not being able to get on the housing ladder because they're stuck in rent.
The reason that I say you should be rejoicing is because, again, turning one house into two means that you're providing more accommodation, and it means you've got more of a supply of houses. More of a supply of houses means that houses become more affordable. And going back to my development, one of my developments that I'm doing at the moment, where I'm turning a rundown derelict factory into 48 properties. Again, that is massively contributing to homelessness. It's massively contributing to affordable housing.
Well, homelessness is on the rise, though. So how can we square that circle? And I'm genuinely interested. Please explain. Homelessness is on the rise.
Yeah,
we've got
more people like me, and then homelessness will be solved.
Right. So people are homeless because they're not hard working or not smart as you. That's why. Is that what you're saying?
That people are homeless. No, not at all. No. I mean, that might be one reason why some people are homeless. People are homeless for many reasons. One reason is because lack of education. One reason is because lack of compassion, and people don't realise that they exist. One reason is because of lack of affordable properties. There's many reasons why homeless people addictions, drug addictions.
Yeah,
I'm doing more for homeless people than just about anybody that I know. I'm going out and not only financing charities, working in drug rehab centres, providing affordable accommodation, educating people to be able to be smart with their money.
Yeah, and by the way, that's good. And I would encourage anyone. I mean, first of all, when homelessness exists, when charities exist, that to me is a symptom of an ill society. We shouldn't have that. And good, being a philanthropist is great. If you go and do these things, I think encourage anyone to go do these things. But I would still say that that doesn't, even though it's good, that still doesn't counteract the system that we're living in.
Important people as well. You asked about you said about the builders. You know, why are they not getting paid all the profit? Well, the reason they're not getting paid all the profit is because they're not putting in any risk. I'm putting in all the risk. If the development goes problematic, it will be me that will have to foot the bill.
Well, then, the risk thing though, there's a shared risk. There's a risk for tenants. I mean, it's insecure housing. There's a risk for workers. I mean, the idea there's zero risk is not true. But again, with the situation,
there's no risk. There's no risk.
There's
the
no
worst
risk.
case scenario. Well, no, if not for the builders. For the labourers and the builders that are actually putting the bricks down and mixing the cement, me saying to them, "Hey, I'll pay you. Yeah, I'll pay you £200 a day to come out and mix cement." I mean, geez, what's the risk for them? That after a week, I'll just stop paying them, and then they'll just go, "All right, next," and go to the next job. There's no risk. Whereas for me, I bought this building for £1 million of my own hard-earned money, got planning permission, had to work with the councils, paid £410,000 to the community of Wolverhampton. And
sure, but that's providing capital. But again, I don't see how that's risk and labourers work. But also in terms of
it's not capital. It's more than that. It's also coming up with all of the drawings, taking on all of the risk, and paying people and providing employment for people, which also helps homelessness. To come and putting together a team of expert planning consultants, expert architects, builders, quantity surveyors, giving all these people jobs to turn this rundown derelict factory into 48 properties. And
but the risk here, I want to nail you on this point about risk, because
please do.
If you have a bad investment or something goes wrong, the worst situation is you'll end up like me or like other people who have to pay their mortgage. That's one thing. But there's also, like I said, everyone in this situation is in a risk. Like I said, the tenants, I mean, we didn't really talk about tenants, but they have a risk too. You have to rely on them going to work to pay for your profits. That's a risk on their behalf. What if they don't get paid? And if it does fail, that's just a bad investment, right? But that's what happens when you just invest in property, which is an unsustainable, I'd say business model, but it's not. But the fundamental thing at the end of the day is, I don't think being a landlord isn't a business, is it? It's just having capital to have enough money to buy more housing to then profit off of it. I wouldn't say that's a service or producing a product.
Well, firstly, we're not talking about being a landlord here. I think being a landlord is a business, but we're talking here about being a property developer.
Yeah, secondly, and they're two separate things, I would say, though. Like being a pure landlord and property manager.
They do kind of coexist together, because once you've built something, you might then rent it out, or you might sell it, or if you sell it, you might sell it to a landlord who then rents it out. But if you had £5 million, that you'd worked hard on and saved up from scratch, would you risk it at building 48?
I would never be a landlord. I would if I had 5 million quid, I would probably build a business, something I enjoy, but I'd never be a landlord because I don't want to engage in a practice that leeches from society, that doesn't add any social utility, and it makes it harder for people. It contributes to the housing crisis. It really does. And then I don't like the idea that I'm extracting profit from renters who are struggling to get on the housing ladder. So no, I personally wouldn't do it. I think that's a bad business practice. I don't think it's particularly moral. But I want to make a distinction between landlords and property managers, because I've got no qualms with property managers. They're doing actual work. They're providing a value to society. So I've got no issues with that. That's fine. But I think it's just purely being a landlord, which is not really doing any work at all.
But if everyone stopped being a landlord, if all the landlords just said, you know what, from now on, we've listened to...
Good. Yes, sell up your housing, make them cheaper.
So, no. We're going to just board up our houses and we're not going to rent them out. And we're just not going to be landlords. What would happen is we'd have absolute devastation across the country. Yeah,
but if you're not going to sell them, sell them off. You're not going to sit on an asset you don't need, right? Which is fair. That is actually happening though, because when you've got like the Russian oligarchs coming over here, buying up investment properties, not even to rent out, but to wait and then sell it off. So that's actually happening under this system as well.
But if everyone did that though, or even if everyone said sell it off, even if everyone said we're just going to sell all our properties, people can't afford to buy the properties. People want to rent. They want to be tenants.
I disagree. They do not want to rent. There are some people who do, but there are millions of people who desperately want to buy a house, but they can't afford it. And having a middleman inside, having a landlord in the middle of it, is pushing up prices. So I'd say if there's less landlords and there's a huge influx of housing on the market, the prices will come down. That would mean it'll be easier to get a house.
And
again, I've also said that we should have state renting, so we shouldn't have a middleman. So I don't see how landlords provide that value. But again, I do agree, if it was just an overnight thing, there would be trouble. This would have to be a transitional process.
Trouble. Every time I get paid, how I see it is, it's a certificate of thanks. So when someone gives me money, whether that be a tenant, whether that be a developer, because I've sold off some flats that I've built, whether that be a student that's paid for some education, whether that be whoever pays me money, the way I see it is they're saying thank you. Let's exchange. I want your product. I want your service. So the richer I get, the more fulfilled I am. And of course, I then have a sense of responsibility to be a good person with that money, to help people, to make the world a better place. So that's my philosophy. That's the way I see it. I don't know how you see money, or I know you don't like landlords. I don't know what the alternative is. You say about the state, everywhere that I've looked at from my research, that the government have owned all the properties and have been the ultimate landlords. It's always ended terribly, because capitalism makes people want to have a competitive advantage, good product to be able to sell. You get better services and better products when it's a free market. So that's my stance.
Okay, there's a few things that I'll touch upon. The first one is, your view is that, okay, it's a product I'm giving, it's a thanks. That is the way you feel. Fine, that's your personal opinion on it. But I'm trying to come at it up from a systemic thing, right? I'm not trying to. Like you say, I hate landlords. I don't hate landlords. I don't particularly like landlords who view people as lower than them. I'm not saying that's you, although some of your tweets have been a bit dodge. But there are some people out there who are just genuinely horrible, and there are some landlords out there who are nice. I know people, I have friends who are landlords. So this is not about like a morality argument. The argument is, and to just kind of briefly round it up, is that I feel like that when it comes to private landlordism, it actually makes the system unsustainable. Housing is a huge problem, and if you say, well, if I make loads of money off a property, that makes me sleep at night because that means I can use that money to reinvest in housing. That is the argument that many people have made, and I guess it makes logical sense, but I think there's a lot of things that are missing out of that. One is, if you again your buy low rent high, for example, that will inflate rent prices, because there are other people who think, you know what, I can do the same, I can increase my rent. And that's just a race to the bottom for other landlords too. You may not be thinking, you might be thinking you're doing a good service. There'll be other people out there who are like, yes, I can exploit that. So I think that's one issue. In terms of capitalism, this is where I take issue about capitalism from a landlord, because being a landlord is very anti-capitalist, and not in the good sense. I'm a socialist, so I am anti-capitalist, but landlordism isn't capitalism. In fact, I'm sure you're aware of Adam Smith, the economist who wrote loads of books, including The Wealth of Nations. He was a big proponent of capitalism. He hated landlords. And also Karl Marx, again, he's on the other political side of the spectrum. They both had the same analysis of landlords, and that was Adam Smith envisions a low profit, high competition system, but landlords don't create that. Essentially, landlords create a monopolization, and the richer you become, the more successful you are, the more monopolization happens. And also under capitalism, the point of exchange is to a business produces a product, produces a social utility, and a customer buys it. And that seems quite fair. And early liberal economists' his theory on capitalism makes it sound pretty great, even as a leftist. I mean, if capitalism was what it was promised to be, I'd probably be a capitalist. But that's not what's happening. And landlords aren't producing a social utility that is being exchanged. Rather, value is being extracted out of thin air through customers paying more for getting less value. That's the two biggest things I wanted to say on that. But it's not a capitalist thing. I mean, we used to live under feudalism. We used to have peasants and the merchant class and landlords, and that's what we had before. And before then, it was inherited land. Now it's, you might say you work hard for it, but again, I think the economy, when you look at the facts and how the economy is set up, majority of people don't go through social mobility. So it's just another way of breeding an elite. Which is landlords. It's a class that shouldn't really exist, and I don't think it's helpful for capitalism, because capitalism would be better if there was competition. I don't see how buying up housing stock, renting it for a profit, sometimes extortionate rents, which again you might claim that's not the case, but other people do. That doesn't seem like a healthy competition under a capitalist system.
So do you think that all landlords are scum?
No, I've said multiple times that I don't try to make the moral argument that all landlords are bad. That's not the case. I think there are some, as I said, I've got friends who are landlords. There are some people who are pretty decent, and there are bad landlords, but it's the system.
Why do you think that I am scum based on my business practices?
I don't think you're scum based on your being a landlord. And I think that the things you've done on social media are they're not great. And I think the publicity stunt, you said it was a publicity stunt, right? That is not helpful during the cost of living crisis, during what's happening, what's going on. And also, but I will say though that just as you say that, look, I provide content and stuff. I put a thumbnail that said "scum landlord," but I'm not going to completely judge you. So I'm not looking at you thinking you're an absolute scum. It's because, and we've had a chat, but when I'm seeing a video of that, I'm thinking, what a scum landlord. A bit of an off the cuff comment, but again, I don't want to bring it back to the morality argument, because that's not helpful. It's the systemic issue at play here.
I don't really agree. No, I don't think so, because I don't know what the other alternative is. I agree that there's a lot of bad landlords, and that's wrong. But I also think there's a lot of legislation. There's an awful lot of legislation to stop landlords kicking out tenants without giving a lot of notice, because it is a human right to have a home. There's a lot of legislation on that. There's also a lot of legislation, and maybe in some areas it needs to be improved, but there is a lot of legislation around living standards and minimum size and things like that. But I just don't know what the alternative is. I think that the idea of
I have provided some alternatives.
Well, the thing is, the council are the worst landlords. They are terrible. I mean, the worst properties that people live in are council properties. The horror stories that I hear from my tenants that say, look at this, and they show you pictures of the council. So the fact that you're saying we shouldn't have landlords, we should just let the council be the ultimate landlord.
That's not the argument. That's not the argument. So I provided a couple of alternatives, but to talk about the council for a second, one, I think you're referring to, austerity. We've had 13 years of austerity under the Tory government. We used to have better quality housing, but I think you're looking at correlation and causation, and a lot of people think this. When the government does something, it's automatically bad. I don't think that's particularly the case. It's how something's funded, right? You can have personal anecdotes about bad council housing, but again, there's so many personal anecdotes about private landlords. There are people who have died due to mold, for example, because some landlords have neglected it, and you would argue they're a bad landlord, fine, but that's technically allowed to happen under the system. So I think it's really easy to look at council housing and be like, they're really bad. That's why we need private landlords. You can do that.
What do you think? You say that you don't think that there's really a place for landlords? They're not adding
No,
value?
not at all. No,
So,
well, private landlordism. I mean, I'm not saying that everyone has to own their own home, because I would like to get to a society where buying and renting is purely down to choice. And I dispute the fact that you think people choose to rent. I don't think that's the case, but I would like to get to a point where that is the case, because there are legitimate reasons to rent. Maybe they're not going to commit.
Help me out then.
Yeah.
Educate me. What would be a better system? As if I am a child. Explain to me.
Okay, so I've already identified before, probably two different ways. One is I do think that you can rent off the state, but it obviously depends on what kind of government you have. I mean, if you have a Tory austerity-ridden government, that is potentially a problem, right?
So renting off the state.
But you can have renting off the state. Another one, which I said before, which is what we go back to, which is building societies. Well, we actually have building societies where local communities would get capital, either partly through funding from a building society and partly from local communities. That's another way of doing it. And a third option, which is pretty good, I think, is housing cooperatives, where literally local communities chip in together without any sort of big overarching company or whatever, or state, or there's regulations, of course, and local communities do that. And then that is housing, which is more efficient, I'd say, because it's targeting places where people need it, and it's also taken out the profit motive, and it's taken out the exploitation inherent in the system that is landlordism.
Sure. So of those three much superior methods than the current one that we have, which is to have a free market and have private landlords, which you think is bad, of those three methods,
well, I don't think it's a free market, though. I do dispute that.
Okay.
I think it's a rigged market.
Okay. We've got 195 countries right now in the world. Which country is doing what you think will be a better solution, and is it successful? Because I'll go and I'll check it out.
Yeah, well, so I would say, I mean, no one's doing it on a mass state scale, but some of the Nordic countries have got some good ideas.
Name one country where this works across the board.
I'll give you Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Right. Again, visit them. Beautiful countries. They don't have they're not quite as radical, but they're making the right step, I think, which is having a bit more state provision in it.
Denmark
again, like I said, I'm not. Even though I don't think landlords should exist, my policy isn't just to ban them outright overnight, because that wouldn't work. The better thing to do would be to have a transition. Hold on. Hold on a second. Let me finish. A transition period where ultimately being a landlord is no longer worth it, and you slowly slowly wean them off it. But you're asking me what country? I'm telling you the policies. There isn't one country that has implemented the socialist utopia I want. That doesn't exist. I'm just talking about specific policies which are good and can be helpful. And one of the policies I'm talking about is what we used to do, which is building societies. That's something that used to work. Sure. So again, I feel like your dichotomy is either landlords or no landlords. And without landlords, you have no housing. I agree that if we were to get rid of landlords overnight, there is going to be a huge supply issue, but that doesn't mean the system is working and the system is efficient. I don't think it is. I think we can move to something better, which is a slow transition to much more democratic and much more localized policy.
But listen, this is the thing. You seem like a nice person. You seem like an intelligent person. Does it not strike you that there's not one country in the world where what you're saying works?
But again, though, I feel that's like the no true Scotsman's fallacy, because you could be like, well, tell me where capitalism works. Oh, it works in this country, but there's actually a lot of issues with capitalism, right? Guess what? China is a capitalist country. What's wrong with China? I don't want to live in China due to their authoritarian states. So it's obviously implemented wrong. So I think I think it's like a debate-ending thing to say, like, well, what country works? And I don't think that's an intelligent question to ask. Hashing out policy is more important, but to get like a gotcha answer, where has it worked, where doesn't it work? Sure, but I'm saying it doesn't work here. I mean, you're very, very wealthy from what you got, so from your point of view, it works just as well. But I don't think you can say that the housing system we have, and you'd even agree there's a lot of flaws to our system, that it works here. So I think if you're going to ask me which country works and which country doesn't, it's a bit more nuanced than that. Because obviously I would rather live in the UK than somewhere like China, even though they're a state capitalist society. But there's still things that need to be improved in this country too.
Sure. I mean, there's no perfect system. And every system that and there's no, wherever you've got people involved and humans involved, there's always going to be problems and complications. But yeah, I just can't. It does what you're saying about abolishing landlords. To me, it doesn't make any sense. But I respect.
Well,
the fact
not
that
abolishing, but one day,
All right,
one day,
slowly
yeah,
abolishing,
yeah,
slowly
yeah.
abolishing. You know what? I think it's. I respect the fact that you've had this convo with me, and I'm open minded. And if I come across and find a better solution, a better system, then maybe I'll give away all my money and follow that better system. But for now, being a landlord, being a developer, and being rich, I think works perfectly well. And I think that I also help a lot more people, homeless people, employing people than most people do. And I think that should be celebrated and applauded.
Samuel, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. You reached out to me, and
Well, you did a video about me.
I did do a video about you, but you did comment and you reached out to me to debate.
I'll just say this very quickly. You did a video about me and said "scum landlord" with a picture of me with the word "scum" on it, and I said to you, if you think I'm a scum landlord, let's have a debate about it. And you're one of the very few people that have come on and debated. So I respect that, and it's been fun.
And again, I want to give you your props that you've debated me. It was a really interesting discussion. Again, I don't think it happens a lot, but I will say thank you for your time, and I really appreciate it.
Curtis, thank you, my friend. Speak to you soon.
Thank you.